In the bustling world of tech, where innovation races forward and new ideas are guarded like treasure, there lies a small, tightly knit video analytics development team. This team is a mix of brilliant minds, coders, engineers, data scientists, all bound together by a common goal: to create something revolutionary. But there's something else that binds them together, something invisible yet profoundly heavy, a non-disclosure agreement, or NDA, that casts a long shadow over their lives. Mark, the lead developer, sat at his desk late one Friday evening. The office was quiet, save for the hum of computers and the occasional tap of a keyboard. He stared at the screen, lines of code reflecting in his tired eyes. But his mind was elsewhere. He was thinking about his wife, Emily, and their 2 kids. It had been weeks since they had a real conversation. Sure, they talked about the usual things: grocery lists, school activities, the weather, but the deeper conversations, the ones that strengthened their bond, were missing. Mark sighed and rubbed his temples. The NDA he signed was ironclad. He couldn't tell Emily what he was working on, no matter how much he wanted to. It wasn't just a job, it was a part of his life, something that consumed his thoughts day and night. And yet, he had to keep it all inside. When Emily asked how his day was, he had to smile and say it was fine, knowing he couldn't share the real challenges he faced, the breakthroughs that thrilled him, or the frustrations that kept him up at night. The secrecy was a burden, one that grew heavier each day. Mark could feel the distance it created between him and his family. Emily had started to look at him differently, with a mix of curiosity and concern. She knew something was wrong, but she couldn't put her finger on it. Their kids sensed it too. They used to run to him when he got home, eager to share their day. But now they hesitated, unsure if Dad was really listening. At work, Mark and his team were in sync, each member understanding the pressure they were under. The project was groundbreaking, something that could change the industry. But the cost of such innovation was steep. They all knew the rules. They couldn't talk about it outside the office, not even with their closest friends or family. It was like living 2 lives, one where they were part of something extraordinary, and another where they had to pretend everything was ordinary. Sarah, one of the data scientists, felt the strain even more acutely. She was engaged, planning a wedding with her fiancé, Tom. But the excitement of wedding planning was overshadowed by the stress of work. Tom would ask her how the project was going, and she'd have to deflect, changing the subject to something trivial. It wasn't long before Tom stopped asking, frustration and confusion etched on his face whenever they sat down to discuss their future. Sarah missed the days when they would talk for hours about their dreams, their plans. Now, every conversation felt like a minefield, and she was always on edge, afraid she'd slip and say something she shouldn't. The NDA hung over her like a dark cloud, affecting not just her work, but her personal life as well. Tom noticed her growing silence, the way she pulled away when he tried to get closer. It was as if a wall had sprung up between them, one that neither of them could break down. The same story played out across the team. Eric, the junior engineer, found himself avoiding his friends, canceling plans, and making excuses. He used to love their weekend hangouts, where they would talk about everything from work to relationships, but now he felt like an outsider. They'd ask him how things were going at the company, eager to hear about the latest tech developments, and he had to give vague, non-committal answers. After a while, they stopped asking, and the invites became less frequent. Eric missed those days, missed the camaraderie and the feeling of being understood. Now he felt isolated, cut off from the people who used to be his support system. The NDA wasn't just a piece of paper, it was a barrier between him and the rest of the world. As the weeks turned into months, the pressure mounted. The team was nearing the final stages of development, and the intensity at work was palpable. But at home, things were unraveling. Mark's relationship with Emily was strained to the breaking point. They argued more often, the frustration of unspoken words and withheld truths bubbling to the surface. Emily felt like she was losing her husband, like the man she married was slipping away. Sarah and Tom were on the brink of calling off their engagement. The stress of the wedding and the secrecy of her work were too much for Sarah to handle. She felt trapped, caught between her commitment to the project and her love for Tom. She couldn't see a way out, and the thought of losing him was unbearable. Yet she couldn't tell him why she was so distant, why she seemed so absent, even when she was right there beside him. Eric, once the life of the party, was now a ghost among his friends. They barely saw him, and when they did, it was like talking to a stranger. He wanted to tell them everything, to explain why he'd become so withdrawn. But he couldn't. The NDA had woven itself into the fabric of his life, pulling him away from the people who mattered most. One day, as the team huddled in a conference room for yet another strategy meeting, the tension was palpable. Mark looked around at his colleagues, seeing the same exhaustion and weariness in their eyes that he felt in his own heart. They were all carrying the same burden, all struggling to keep their personal lives intact, while working on something they couldn't even share with those they loved. The meeting ended, and Mark lingered behind, staring out the window at the city below. He thought about what he was sacrificing, what they were all sacrificing, for the sake of this project. The secrecy, the isolation, the growing distance between him and his family. It was all taking a toll. He wondered if it was worth it, if the success of the project could ever outweigh the damage being done to their relationships. That evening, Mark went home, and as he walked through the door, he felt a pang of guilt. Emily was sitting on the couch, a book in her hands, but she wasn't reading. She looked up at him, her eyes searching his face for some sign, some indication of what was going on in his mind. "Mark," she said softly, "we need to talk." He nodded, his throat tight. They sat down together, the silence between them heavy with unspoken words. For a moment, neither of them knew where to start. Finally, Mark took a deep breath. "I can't tell you everything, but I want you to know that this project, it's important, it's consuming all of us, but I hate what it's doing to us, to our family." Emily reached out and took his hand, her touch warm and reassuring. "I don't need to know the details, Mark. I just need to know that you're still here with us, that you still care." "I do," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I care more than anything. I just don't know how to balance it all." Emily squeezed his hand. "We'll figure it out together, but you have to let me in, even if you can't tell me everything. I need to know that we're in this together." Mark nodded, tears welling up in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Emily. I'm so sorry for the distance, for everything." She leaned in and kissed his cheek, a small, tender gesture that spoke volumes. "We'll get through this, Mark. We will." As they sat there, holding on to each other, Mark realized that while the NDA was a necessary part of his work, it didn't have to define his life. He could still be present, still connect with his family, even if he couldn't share every detail. It would be hard, but it was possible. And across the city, in similar conversations, Sarah, Eric, and the rest of the team were coming to the same realization. The NDA was a challenge, a heavy burden to bear, but it wasn't insurmountable. They could still be there for the people they loved, still maintain the relationships that mattered most. In the end, the project would succeed or fail, but what truly mattered was that they didn't lose themselves or each other in the process.